Welcome to Board Game Brawl. My name is Nick, and today we are going to take a look at the game Boss Monster. This is a light to moderate card game for 2 to 4 players from Brotherwise Games, and this is actually their first game, I believe. This was a successful Kickstarter last year, and the retail edition just came out. That's the edition that I'm going to be reviewing. The Kickstarter edition has some extra bells and whistles, but nothing major. It's still the same game. Now, Boss Monster is a love letter to the old 8-bit and 16-bit side-scrollers and RPGs of video game eras past. And you can just tell from looking at the box and from looking at all the cards that I'm going to show you, the theme is just dripping off of this game. Now, I love all those old-school video games, and I love a great theme in a game. But does a great theme make a great game? Well, I'm going to show you the game, and then I'm going to come back and tell you what I think. So in Boss Monster, every player is actually a boss who has their own dungeon that they're building out. And you're trying to lure heroes from town into your dungeon and be the first one to kill them. If you can acquire 10 souls by doing so, you win the game. But if you're not able to kill the heroes, they're going to kill you, and then you're eliminated from the game. So the setup is very simple. You're going to have a deck of heroes, leaving a space for the town, a room deck, leaving a space for a discard pile, and a spell deck, also leaving space for a discard pile. The very first thing you're going to do is hand out a boss monster randomly to each player in the game. And like I said, the game goes from 2 to 4 players. So there's all kinds of different boss monsters, and they all have different flavor based on video games. So you have King Croak here, who looks a lot like Bowser from Super Mario Brothers. You have Draculord, who looks like you-know-who. You have Gorgana, who's like a Medusa, and you have Cerebellus, who looks awfully similar to Mother Brain from Metroid. And there's a few important things on each boss monster card. So first off, you have a little XP symbol down here, and that's going to determine the turn order of the game. Whoever has the highest XP determines the turn order. Then you have these little symbols down in the corner of the card. These are treasure symbols, and every boss monster is going to have a different symbol. These represent what you're going to use to lure the heroes into your dungeon, because all heroes want treasure. And the final thing that you have on your boss monster card is their level up symbol. When you finish completing your dungeon and build your 5th room, you immediately get your level up ability. These can be very powerful and game changing, but you only get them once and you must use them right away. So when every player has their boss monster, you're just going to lay it down in front of you, leave plenty of space to the left of the card. We'll assume that we're going to do a 2-player game. So we each have our boss monster. King Croak here has the higher total, so he's going to go first. Now, at the start of the game, everyone's going to take a hand of room cards and spell cards. Room cards are what you're going to use to actually build out your dungeon. And there's 2 different kinds. There's monster rooms, and you see they have a lot of really amusing little pixelated images here, like the Succubus Spa, and the Brain Sucker Hive, and the Goblin Armory, and the Dragon Hatchery. And they all have different abilities, and one thing that they have in common with our boss monsters is the treasure symbol. When you're actually trying to lure heroes out of town and into your dungeon, you're going to add up all the treasure symbols you have from your monster and from your rooms. And every room has a different ability that takes place when you build it, and sometimes continuously after that. So for example, the Succubus boss says that once per turn, if a hero dies in this room, choose an opponent. Take a random room or spell card from that opponent's hand. So you might ask yourself, well, how does a hero die in this room? Well, that's the other important part of a room card. The number down in the corner with the black heart is how much damage this room deals to a hero when it goes through that room. And that number is going to vary based on the room. So you see that this room does 1, the Brain Sucker Hive with the little things that are absolutely not Metroids deals 2 damage, and the Goblin Armory deals 1. The Dragon Hatchery deals 0 damage, and you may say, well, that room kind of sucks. But this room has all 4 treasure types at the same time, which means it's much more likely you're going to gain a hero. So that's part of the strategy of the game, is determining which room you want to build based on its special ability, its ability to lure heroes into your dungeon, and how much damage it deals. Trap rooms work the same way, but they usually have different effects. So for instance, the Mimic Vault says that when you build this room, you choose an ordinary hero in town and place it at the entrance to your dungeon. The Haunted Library will let you draw spell cards instead of room cards. And the Bottomless Pit is pretty obvious. You can destroy this room to automatically kill a hero. And they all have treasure symbols too, and you'll build them in the same way. Now eventually, you can only build 5 rooms in your dungeon, and you'll lay them out like this. And when you build your 5th room, there's pretty much nowhere else for you to go. But you can always build over rooms that you've already made, and eventually you're going to want to build advanced rooms, which you can only place over rooms that share a treasure symbol. And these are almost always much more powerful. So for instance, the Monster's Ballroom, which has damage equal to the amount of monster rooms you have in your dungeon, the Vampire Bordello, which lets you heal wounds, and so on and so forth. The Crushinator is a personal favorite of mine. And you're going to keep doing this, building out rooms, eventually getting your level up ability. So, the whole point of building these rooms, however, is to lure heroes. At the start of every round, you're going to randomly place heroes in town equal to the amount of players in the game. You'll just draw them straight from the top of the deck. So in the 2-player game, you'll put out 2 heroes at the start of every round. And these heroes all have the same basic layout on their cards. They have a name, they have a little bit of flavor text here, which doesn't really mean much, like Koei, the Last Dragon Mage. But the important stuff is in the top right-hand corner, which is the treasure symbol. This is the type of treasure that these heroes want. Mages always want books. Fighters always want swords. Thieves always want money. And clerics always want holy symbols. The other important parts of the card. In the bottom left-hand corner is that hero's health. This is how much damage your dungeon has to deal to that hero before it gets to your boss monster at the end of the dungeon. If you can deal that much damage or more to that hero, it dies, and you claim it as a point, which is the diamond symbol on the backside of the card. So the hero will travel through your dungeon from room to room, and if it dies, put it face down, claim it as a point. If, however, your hero gets through your entire dungeon and you cannot deal that much damage, it stays face up, and you put it off to the side or underneath your boss monster as a wound, which is what the blood symbol is. The symbols between those two are actually for the number of players, so you would only use this card in a 4-player game. And heroes have varying health, and they all have different treasure symbols that they need. The Fool actually goes to the hero who has the fewest souls in a round. Now eventually, you're going to mill through every one of the ordinary heroes with the gray backs in the deck, and get down to the epic heroes. Now epic heroes function the same way, but with some different stats. First off, the good news is that they're worth 2 souls for everyone that you kill. The bad news is that they have many more hit points, and if they manage to get through your dungeon without dying, they deal 2 wounds to you. You can only take 5 wounds before you die, so that's a big deal. But if you can kill these fast enough, you only need 10 points to win, so that can be a big deal as well. Now, there is some things you can do to make sure that you are able to kill these heroes and not take them as wounds. And aside from your room abilities, you could play spell cards. Now, spell cards are very powerful, and you only get 2 at the beginning of the game, and only room abilities are going to let you draw more during the course. But they have some pretty drastic effects. For instance, the freeze power, one of my personal favorites, lets you essentially shut down an entire room, either in your dungeon or another player's dungeon. This could be really, really bad for your opponents, forcing them to come up with an alternate plan for killing a hero that's traveling through their dungeon at that time. There's also teleportation, which will send a hero back to the start of your dungeon and make him go through it all over again if you're not able to deal enough damage to him the first time. And there's the assassin card in giant size, which lets you deal more damage in a monster room, and so on and so forth. Spells are very powerful, and you should always try to gain them however possible and hold on to them. Now, gameplay is going to continue like this, with a building phase, building new rooms, then a baiting phase, trying to determine who gets what heroes, and you're always going to determine who gets the heroes by who has the most of any given treasure symbol. So, if I had the most books, I would take both of these mages. But if my opponent had the most books, he would get them. If there was a tie, they don't go anywhere. They stack up in town until the next round. Eventually, after the baiting phase, we go straight to the adventuring phase, where the heroes actually go through our dungeon and we either score them or take them as wounds. Gameplay continues like this until there is either only 1 player left standing and all the others are dead, or 1 player has accrued 10 souls in 1 turn. And that's how you play the game. So, in case you couldn't tell, Boss Monster is a game that relies on its theme. It's just dripping off of the game in every way possible. While I've been playing the game, I've played the game about 7 times now, I actually felt like I was this boss monster who had control of this dungeon and was making the heroes go through it. It felt really cool in that regard. And but even though it relies on its theme and it's a somewhat light game, there is some strategy to it, and I really appreciated that about it. I really enjoy the beginning of the game where you're desperately trying to not lure the heroes into your dungeon because you're probably not going to be able to kill them, and they are probably going to kill you. But I like how that amps up from there and it becomes this like really cutthroat race to get those heroes into your dungeon. And it has a really nice arc in that regard. But even with that amount of strategy, it's still a somewhat fast game. You're looking at a half hour, maybe 40 minutes your first or second time out. But once everyone knows what they're doing, it's going to click by very, very fast. That being said, as I said at the beginning of this video, a great theme does not necessarily make a great game. And this game has some serious faults that I think hurt it in the long run. For starters, the most important part is probably player elimination. I say the same thing about Werewolf. No one likes being knocked out of a game, especially very early on. I find that it's a design flaw. It's one thing to take wounds and perhaps lose points, or to just take some sort of penalty during the course of the game. That's understandable. To actually be knocked out of the game, especially in a game that could theoretically go on for about 40 minutes, it's pretty bad. And hand in hand with that, this game has a runaway leader problem. If one player is doing very, very well, they're going to continue to do well exponentially. As an example, in the very first game that we played, there were 4 players. 2 of us did very, very well. The other 2 did not. It was basically a 2-player race. The 2 of us racing to the finish line, the other 2 just sort of sitting around and waiting for one of us to win. And I've seen that happen several times since. So that's a very bad problem. And I have to say that I mentioned at the beginning of this video that there's a Kickstarter edition that has all kinds of extra cards and stuff like that. Well, this game needs it. Eventually, you're going to get burnt out in this game, sooner rather than later. It's just too long for what it is to make a lot out of what you have in the box. With further expansions, you could probably increase the replayability, but as it is now, after almost 10 games, I'm getting a little burned out on it already. But like I said, the theme of this game is great. If you like old school video games, this is probably a must-buy for you. For the price that it is, you can't really go wrong. If you want a card game that's got a little more depth and strategy and replay value, this is one that you're going to have to try. I can't give my full recommendation to it, but I will say that I have had fun with it, and if you like video games, you should definitely give it a shot. My final thoughts. Boss Monster has some pretty significant flaws. I'm not saying it's a bad game. In fact, I have a lot of fun with the game. It's a solid game, but I just feel that there are some significant problems that should either be addressed, perhaps with more expansions, or that you just need to look past and really soak in the theme of the game. If you're a gamer, and especially with old school games, this is probably an automatic purchase for you. You're going to love this game. It's light enough and fast enough that you're going to overlook the faults. If the theme is not really for you, you'll probably want to move on, find another card game that's a little deeper, and doesn't have some of the more significant problems, the player elimination, and some of the little wonky rules. But I do think it's a solid game. It's a very good first effort for this company, Brothers Wise. They did a good job, and I'd like to see more from them. Board Game Brawl, signing off.